Hello everyone, I'm Colin Kinnett. Are you ready for more table saw hacks today? That's what we're going to be doing. And I know there's tons of you who watch these videos who haven't subscribed yet, and I invite you to do that. Subscribe, click the notification bell so you find out every time I upload a new video. And let's go over to the table saw. Well, let's start off with the hack that I use the most on the table saw, and that's the tape measure. And the reason I use a tape measure every time is because I use 3 different thicknesses of blades. So that means that this scale is always off a little bit depending on what thickness of blade I use. But look at, when I'm on the table saw, I want to know exactly where my tape is. And look at what I've done. Now, some of you with sharp eyes may have already figured this out, but look, here's what I've done. Every tape has a clip on it, and you know, even though this looks like chrome, this is just chrome over plastic. There's no metal on any of these tape measures anymore, except the clip. And look at what you can do with these super high power magnets. You can lift that clip up and slip a magnet underneath there, and look at where you can store your tape measure then. With that magnet on there, and there's already one in here, I can clip it on the edge of my table saw, and look at the fence goes back and forth. It doesn't even interfere with it. I can take these and put them anywhere on my table saw, and I know where my tapes are. I don't have to go looking around. When I get finished with them, I put them right back in the same spot. This is the handiest thing on the table saw. Now what you're looking at is the arbor of my saw. So typically this is where a blade would sit, but I've taken the blade off for right now. What you're looking at down here, if you can see when I take my hand out, I have magnets down there. I have 3 of these little magnets. And the purpose of the magnets is because sometimes I'm clumsy when I'm changing blades and I drop the nut. And normally what would happen with this, the nut would roll down and get caught in a hose, and I have to dismantle part of my saw to get the nut off. But now with magnets down there, I can just reach down and pick up the nut, and it's good to go. The magnets don't touch the blades. They're actually quite a distance from the blade. They don't interfere with any dust collection. Well, I've got the insert out of the table saw. Let's talk about blade installation for a second. And I know that this is a problem because I've seen it firsthand many, many times. First of all, when you're installing blades, make sure that you never lay your blade flat on a steel bench, because that can and does from time to time chip the carbide on the tip of the blade, because carbide is actually more like a crystal. It's not like a steel. Now, when you're installing blades, I've seen this many times, particularly with people who have contractor saws. And the problem with contractor saws, if you think the blade is on the arbor and it's not, and you release it, or maybe you don't have a very good grip on it, if that blade drops, for example, it will fall, in a lot of cases, it will fall all the way through to the floor. And if there's a concrete floor underneath, it will and does chip the blade. It will chip the carbide on the bottom of the blade, at least 1, sometimes 2. I've seen it many, many times, and it's pretty easy to identify, especially if it's a brand new blade and somebody brings it back to the dealer and they say, oh, it came chipped like that. No, it doesn't ever come chipped like that. I've seen thousands of blades. They never come chipped. It's because somebody inadvertently dropped it and it fell through onto the floor and chipped. So there's a couple of ways to solve that. Sometimes saws are there's not very much room in here. The first thing you want to do, especially with a saw that doesn't give you much room, is make sure you crank the arbor all the way up to the top. Now you can purchase these little hook things, and they're really a very strong magnet in them. You'll have to make sure that you get the right ones so that they've got a very strong magnet. And you know what? They will hold that. If you have a problem gripping, that will hold your blade. Even one of them, they're amazingly strong, and to get them off, you can just break them like that. Now, the other thing I've done with somebody who had a poor grip. I just made one of these. I'll show you close up in a second. And it just sits on the blade like that. It's just a little jig that I made up for them. And you can take that, put that in the blade like that, and drop it out like that. And if you don't have enough room, now it's easy to put the washer and the bolt or the nut back on. So a couple of quick tricks there for mounting blades so you make sure you don't chip the carbide. So that's the little mounting jig that I was just showing you, and it just sits in there, and you can see, if you look closely, there's a little tiny bit of a rabbit there, and that's just so that the blade, I'm trying to push up on it and it won't because it's catching in that little bit of a rabbit, and the back just looks like that. That's all it is. It's a very simple little jig. And if you have a problem with gripping the blades or you don't have enough room, nothing fancy, you can make this out of just some scrap thin plywood and fit that to your saw. Very often I use my table saw for cutting rabbets. And when you do that, I don't want to damage my fence on there. And if you look closely, you'll see there's no semicircles on there where it got too close to the saw blade. And that's because we always use something called a sacrificial fence. And for years and years, I used to use a piece of wood. And I never seemed to have the same piece of wood because it would get damaged, it would get used in another project, it would get thrown out, lost. But the problem with that is finding a piece of wood that was always flat, that was always the right length and the right height. Sometimes they were too long or too short. But then I would clamp them on, and that wasn't ideal because sometimes I needed something that was higher. I was running through something that was higher, so the clamps would get in the way. So one day I just decided it was time to get a permanent sacrificial fence, and all I did was go out and get a piece of this high density plastic. You can get this at any plastic shop, and you can buy these clamps. They're readily available anywhere, and you just drill a hole in the plastic somewhere in the middle of the plastic, and they just slip in like that. And now when I need a sacrificial fence, I keep it next to my table saw. I know where it is. I can move it back and forth here because I've got stop and start dados on there, so I can move that to wherever I want. This plastic is always flat, and the sacrificial fence is always ready to go. It's a big, big time saver. Well, that concludes my video for today. I hope you found some ideas and maybe some inspiration for things that you can do that'll make your woodworking safer and more fun. I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching.